set free. I've been set free. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, saved a wretch like me. Once was lost, but now I'm found. Blind, but now I see. I can see you now. I can see the love in your eyes, laying yourself down, raising up the broken to life. You take our failures, you take our weakness, you set your treasure in jars of clay. So take this heart, Lord, I'll be your vessel, the world to see your life in me. Oh, amazing grace, how sweet the sound, saved a wretch like me. Once was lost, but now I'm found. Blind, but now I see. I can see you now. Oh, I can see the love in your eyes, laying yourself down, raising up broken to life. Oh, I can see you now. I can see the love in your eyes, laying yourself down, raising up the broken to life.
In our house, we have a number of crosses. And each one's unique in its size and its style, and we got them from a diversity of different places. Some we purchased, and then some were given to us as gifts. Some we've actually done this. We've taken off the wall, and we've given them to other couples as they started their new life together. We gave them as wedding presents, as just a reminder of who Jesus is, that Jesus is with them, and a reminder of his position within the home. I remember the first cross I owned. It was a necklace. I was about in the 7th grade, and my mom took me to the Christian bookstore in Lebanon, and she bought me this cross. And I took it to school. Man, I love that necklace. My friends, they called it a Jesus necklace. And I was cool with that. I love that necklace. I remember one time going to PE, and as I went into PE, we were wrestling that day, and so I took that necklace and I hung it on a hook that you would hang your coat on. I remember looking at that and just thinking, man, I love that necklace. When I came back after PE, that necklace had been stolen. It was gone. Like my Jesus cross had been stolen. Like, who steals a Jesus cross? Like, theft is bad enough, but to steal a Jesus cross, that just feels sacrilegious. As we're entering into Good Friday, I'm reminded that the Jesus cross that I got in the 7th grade, it wasn't the first cross that I had been given. There was actually another cross that I had been given 2,000 years earlier. It was so much more significant than the trinkets people wear today. Many of whom don't even realize what they're wearing. They wear it because maybe it looks cool, or maybe it makes them look more goth or more rock and roll, or maybe in a strange way it makes them feel more spiritual. Many haven't paused to fully recognize that what they're wearing is actually a symbol of beauty and brutality. beauty. It's the purest expression of beauty. It's the beauty of God looking at you and calling you into his family to come and be his child. And brutality. The only way that you could be adopted by God as his child is through Jesus, God the Son, submitting and enduring to the worst kind of torturous death ever invented. Oftentimes we want to run to the beauty. But here's the reality. You can't see the beauty unless you first see the brutality. And that's the other side of the trinket that people wear so casually, that instrument designed to slowly kill an individual in the most painful way possible, designed to torture mentally, designed to torture emotionally, designed to torture physically, slowly bleeding the life and breath from the individual. And because of this, we have to remember that trinket that so many people wear, or maybe that tattoo that people display, it was never designed to be cute. It was never designed to be a fashion statement. It was designed to be a nightmare. And so tonight, as we step into Good Friday, we take a closer look at the brutality that Jesus endured for us, that we would have a whole new perspective of the beauty.
Have you ever been betrayed by a close friend? Even worse, what about a group of friends? Have you ever felt completely abandoned by those closest to you? Tonight, the text is going to take us into some dark places. We will hear the mockery of an angry crowd. We'll hear the sound of a whip tearing flesh and screams of pain. The sound of a cross being dropped to the ground. Often we are quick to go there, but tonight we need to be reminded of the pain that started before Jesus was even arrested. It was a relational pain between a father and a son, and an abandonment of Jesus by his closest friends. Leaving there, he went, as he so often did, to the Mount of Olives. The disciples followed him, and when they arrived at the place, he said, "Pray that you don't give in to temptation." He pulled away from them about a stone's throw, knelt down and prayed, "Father, remove this cup from me, but please, not what I want, what do you want?" At once an angel from heaven was at his side, strengthening him. He prayed on all the harder. Sweat wrung from him like drops of blood, poured off his face. He got up from prayer, went back to the disciples, and found them asleep. Drugged with grief, he said, "What business do you have sleeping? Get up, pray so you don't give in to temptation." No sooner were the words out of his mouth than a crowd showed up. Judas, the one from the 12, in the lead. He came right up to Jesus to kiss him. Jesus said, "Judas, you would betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" When those with him saw what was happening, they said, "Master, shall we fight?" One of them took a swing at the chief priest's servant and cut off his right ear. Jesus said, "Let them be, even in this." Then, touching the servant's ear, he healed him. Jesus spoke to those who had come, high priests, temple police, religion leaders. "What is this, jumping me with swords and clubs as if I were a dangerous criminal? Day after day I've been with you in the temple, and you've not so much as lifted a hand against me. But do it your way. It's a dark night, a dark hour."
How do you respond to adversity? Do you run away and try to hide? Do you get angry and lash out at those around you? Did you notice what Jesus just did? See, Jesus is different. The beauty in Jesus is that he didn't step away from adversity. He stepped into adversity. It's not a picture of Jesus hiding behind his friends, who, by the way, had abandoned him prior. Rather, stepping in front of the disciples, leading them down a path to redemption. And knowing full well what was about to happen, he didn't even lash out at his enemies. He actually had mercy and healed a servant's ear that had been cut off in the commotion. The night is dark, and it's going to get even darker. And within the darkness, the beauty of Jesus' character shines brightly. Arresting Jesus, they marched him off and took him into the house of the chief priest. Peter followed, but at a safe distance. In the middle of the courtyard, some people had started a fire and were sitting around it, trying to keep warm. One of the serving maids sitting at the fire noticed him, then took a second look and said, "This man was with him." He denied it. Woman, I don't even know him. A short time later, someone else noticed him and said, you're one of them. But Peter denied it. Man, I am not. About an hour later, someone else spoke up, really adamant. He's got to have been with him. He's got Galilean written all over him. Peter said, man, I do not know what you're talking about. At that very moment, the last word hardly off his lips, a rooster crowed. Just then the master turned and looked at Peter. Peter remembered what the master had said to him. Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. He went out and cried and cried and cried. The men in charge of Jesus began poking fun at him, slapping him around. They put a blindfold on him and taunted, "Who hit you that time?" They were having a grand time with him. When it was morning, the religious leaders of the people and the high priests and scholars all got together and brought him before their high council. They said, "Are you the Messiah?" He answered, "If I said yes, you wouldn't believe me. If I asked what you meant by your question, you wouldn't answer me. So here's what I have to say. From here on, the Son of Man takes his place at God's right hand, the place of power." They all said, "So you admit your claim to be the Son of God?" "You're the ones who keep saying it," he said. But they had made up their minds. "Why do we need any more evidence? We've all heard him as good as say it himself."
The text has now taken a very dark turn. The abandonment of Jesus by Peter, one of Jesus' closest friends, is now fully established. And it's the picture of Peter. See, not once or twice, but 3 times denying to others that he even knows Jesus. And to drive home this lie, it's a picture of Peter getting loud and cursing to others in hopes that they would believe the lie. And Jesus knows what's going on. Jesus knows Peter is both denying him and abandoning him. So now it becomes a picture of an isolated Jesus in the hands of his enemies. You see, up until this point, his enemies have simply used words in an attempt to harm him. Now things are escalating and escalating quickly. Words are being combined with physical violence, fist punching a blindfolded Jesus in the face. It's a picture of Jesus' face becoming bloodied, swollen, bruised, as the insults and mockery intensifies. The text has now taken a very dark turn, and it's going to get even darker. Then they all took Jesus to Pilate and began to bring up charges against him. They said, "We found this man undermining our law and order, forbidding taxes to be paid to Caesar, and setting himself up as Messiah King." Pilate asked him, "Is this true that you're the king of the Jews?" "Those are your words, not mine," Jesus replied. Pilate told the high priests and the accompanying crowd, "I find nothing wrong here. He seems harmless enough to me." But they were vehement. "He's stirring up unrest among the people with his teaching, disturbing the peace everywhere, starting in Galilee and now all through Judea. He's a dangerous man, endangering the peace." When Pilate heard that, he asked, "So he's a Galilean?" Realizing that he properly came under Herod's jurisdiction, he passed the buck to Herod, who just happened to be in Jerusalem for a few days. Herod was delighted when Jesus showed up. He had wanted for a long time to see him. He had heard so much about him. He hoped to see him do something spectacular. He peppered him with questions. Jesus didn't answer, not one word. But the high priests and religion scholars were right there, saying their piece, strident and shrill in their accusations. Mightily offended, Herod turned on Jesus. His soldiers joined in, taunting and jeering. Then they dressed him up in an elaborate king costume and sent him back to Pilate. That day, Herod and Pilate became thick as thieves. Always before, they had kept their distance. Then Pilate called in the high priests, the rulers, and the others and said, "You brought this man to me as a disturber of the peace. I examined him in front of all of you and found there was nothing to your charge. And neither did Herod, for he has sent him back here with a clean bill of health. It's clear that he's done nothing wrong, let alone anything deserving death. I'm going to warn him to watch his step and let him go." At that, the crowd went wild. "Kill him! Give us Barabbas!" Barabbas had been thrown in prison for starting a riot in the city and for murder. Pilate still wanted to let Jesus go and so spoke out again. But they kept shouting back, "Crucify! Crucify him!" He tried a third time. "But for what crime? I found nothing in him deserving death. I'm going to warn him to watch his step and let him go." But they kept at it, a shouting mob, demanding that he be crucified. And finally they shouted him down. Pilate caved in and gave them what they wanted. He released the man thrown in prison for rioting and murder and gave them Jesus to do whatever they wanted.
What a complete mess. Like on one side is Jesus, and who's Jesus? He's God in the flesh. He's not a created being. He always was. He always will be. He's the word that spoke the universe into existence. He's the name by which every human being, like whether you love Jesus or you hate Jesus, every human being will one day bow down and recognize his authority. And so it's a picture of true divine authority on one side, and then what do you have? You have mankind's authority on the other side, and then the questions become, who has more authority? Like, who should be submitting to who? Whose authority should be in the spotlight? And by the way, all the answers should be Jesus, right? But that's not what we see in the text. In the text, we see mankind's authority, and often mankind's authority is loud, and Jesus' authority often seems silent. In the text, we see mankind's authority make a mockery of Jesus' authority, like they're wanting Jesus to entertain them. But Jesus refuses to entertain them. So what do? They mock him. They dress him up like a king. And little did they know that no earthly king's clothing is truly worthy of the majesty of this king. And then it becomes a picture of a bloodthirsty mob chanting, "Crucify him, crucify him." Like, get this. They weren't saying, "Kill him." They were saying, "Crucify him." So beat him, whip him, mock him, torture him, give him the slowest, most painful death possible. And then we're left with this picture of an earthly authority, Pilate, and he's being swayed in the court of public opinion to crucify not only an innocent man, but Jesus, the Son of God. And at this point, if you're reading this for the first time, you're just crying out like, "Jesus, do something." Like, Jesus, just rise up. Like, show them who you truly are. Like, Jesus, put them in their place. You may be thinking like, "Jesus, slay your enemies." And Jesus does do something. Let's read on. As they let him off, they made Simon, a man from Cyrene, who happened to be coming in from the countryside, carry the cross behind Jesus. A huge crowd of people followed, along with the women, weeping and carrying on. At one point, Jesus turned to the women and said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, don't cry for me. Cry for yourselves and for your children. The time is coming when they'll say, 'Lucky the women who never conceived, lucky the wombs that never gave birth, lucky the breasts that never gave milk.' Then they'll start calling to the mountains, 'Fall down on us,' calling to the hills, 'Cover us up.' If people do these things to a live green tree, can you imagine what they'll do with dead wood?" Two others, both criminals, were taken along with him for execution. And when they got to the place called the Skull, they crucified him along with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. And Jesus prayed, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." Dividing up his clothes, they threw dice for them. The people stood there staring at Jesus, and the ringleaders made faces taunting, "He saved others, let him save himself, the Messiah of God, ha, the chosen, ha." The soldiers also came up and poked fun at him, making a game of it. They toasted him with sour wine. "So you're the king of the Jews, save yourself." Printed over him was a sign, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals hanging in alongside cursed him. "Some Messiah you are, save yourself, save us." But the other one made him shut up. "Have you no fear of God? You're getting the same as him. We deserve this, but not him. He did nothing to deserve this." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you enter your kingdom." And he said, "Don't worry, I will. Today you will join me in paradise." By now it was noon. The whole earth became dark, the darkness lasting 3 hours, a total blackout. The temple curtain split right down the middle. Jesus called loudly, "Father, I place my life in your hands." And then he breathed his last. When the captain there saw what happened, he honored God. This man was innocent, a good man, and innocent. All who had come around as spectators to watch the show, when they saw what actually happened, were overcome with grief and headed home. And those who knew Jesus well, along with the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a respectful distance and kept vigil. There was a man by the name of Joseph, a member of the Jewish High Council, a man of good heart and good character. He had not gone along with the plans and actions of the council. His hometown was the Jewish village of Arimathea. He lived in alert expectation for the kingdom of God. And he went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Taking him down, he wrapped him in a linen shroud and placed him in a tomb chiseled in the rock, a tomb never yet used. It was the day before Sabbath, the Sabbath just about to begin. The women who had been companions of Jesus from Galilee followed along. They saw the tomb where Jesus' body was placed. Then they went back to prepare burial spices and perfumes. They rested quietly on the Sabbath as commanded. As we read this, you might be saying, "Jesus, just do something." And I need to remind us that Jesus did do something. Jesus submitted. And by the way, his submission was bigger than just submission to earthly rulers or submission to an angry crowd or even to the hands of the soldiers that crucified him. Jesus' submission was to God the Father himself. It was God the Father's plan for Jesus to be crucified. And by the way, what was the motivation behind God the Father's plan? It was this. It was his deep love for his enemies, his desire to redeem and to reconcile his enemies to himself, to transform enemies into sons and daughters. And there literally was no other way that this could have been done than through the brutal death of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And it was brutal. Beaten beyond recognition, whipped within an inch of his life, beard ripped from his face, stripped naked, pinned to a cross with nails. And then later on, to use all the energy he could muster to kind of gather himself once more, raising himself up on the nails, and with one last breath to finally cry out, "It is finished," and then to suffocate to death on the cross. It was brutal. This Good Friday, take another look at how brutal it was. If you want to see how beautiful it was, you first have to walk down the path to how brutal it was, to see the depths of sacrifice, so you can see with fresh eyes the depths of God's love for you. It's Good Friday. Darkness has covered the earth as the crucified Christ hangs from the cross. It's Good Friday. Jesus has willingly just been brutally murdered for you. It's Good Friday. Creation itself is just shaken violently at the death of Jesus. It's Good Friday. A sorrowful hush has just overwhelmed the crowd. It's Good Friday. Bloody nails that once held the lifeless body of Jesus, they're being pried from the wood. It's Good Friday. Jesus' lifeless body is sealed in a tomb. It's Good Friday, and nothing feels good about it. It feels dark. It feels dirty. It feels hopeless. And the tension for all of us is to do this. It's to feel it, to spend the next several hours, to spend the next several days processing what Jesus did for us out of love for us. So if you want to celebrate like you've never celebrated on Sunday, first you have to enter into the story. You can't fully see the beauty until you've first seen the brutality. See what Jesus endured out of obedience to the Father and a love for you and I. And now we will respond. In the next few moments, I'm going to encourage you to remember Jesus, to remember his life, his brutal death, his sacrifice. Remember his body that was torn. Remember through the ways that Jesus said he wanted to be remembered, through partaking of communion. And so right where you're at, we encourage you to just create a sacred place, a time for you to take bread and eat it as a symbol of Jesus' body that was shredded for you and I. And a drink of juice, symbolic of Jesus' blood that was poured out for us. We do this with an attitude of thankfulness, and gratitude, and as a worshipful response in this moment.
What can wash away my sin? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. What can make me whole again? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. Oh, precious is the flow that makes me white as snow. No other fount I know. Nothing but the blood of Jesus. For my part in this I see nothing but the blood, Jesus. For my cleansing this my plea, nothing but the blood of Jesus. And oh, precious is the flow that makes me white as snow. No other fount I know. Nothing but the blood of Jesus. Oh, nothing but the blood. Nothing can for sin atone. Nothing but the blood of Jesus. Not of good that I have done. Nothing but the blood of Jesus. And oh, precious is the flow that makes me white as snow. No other fount I know. Nothing but the blood of Jesus. Nothing but the blood